Hello. How's everybody? Thank you for being here today for my presentation on SharePoint 2010 Workflows. Let's automate this process. As Yasmina said, my name is Jonathan Lightfoot. Let's see here, I'm trying to get the slides to go forward. There we go. Okay. I am the co-author of Microsoft SharePoint Plain and Simple, and also the forthcoming book, one of these co-authors on SharePoint Foundation 2010 Inside Out. My Twitter information is @xsetnav29, and my email address is listed there as well. But this presentation is about me. It's about helping you use SharePoint 2010 to create workflows so hopefully you can automate some of your processes that you're currently doing. So for today's session, what we're going to learn about is how to use predefined workflows, how do we use SharePoint Designer 2010 to create and edit workflows, how can we develop routine solutions for automating some of our more complex business processes, and then finally we're going to go into how do we flowchart a business process using Visio 2010 and then automate it within the SharePoint 2010 environment using SharePoint Designer 2010. Currently, the issue as I see it, here we are in the 21st century, and we're still using a lot of 18th century techniques. The majority of our business processes are manually driven. If you'll remember, however, this is not the way it's supposed to be. When the personal computer first came along several decades ago now, the vision for the future was that the computers would take over all of our trivial tasks for us. However, if you go into any office today, you're going to see a lot of paper processes, manually driven processes in place that do require human beings to carry out those processes. Now, while manually driven processes were effective and have taken business to where we are today, they do tend to fall short. For example, they're very time-consuming. Someone or a group of people have to manually process content in order for it to either be published, approved, or acted upon. This cuts into the productivity of the modern workforce. Instead of being able to dedicate more time towards creating content, we have to take out time in order just to process our content. Now, I'm not saying that processing of content is not important, only that it is an inefficient use of people resources that we could use to create and act upon content instead. Also, with manual processes, we have the issue of errors being introduced into the information that's copied directly incorrectly into the databases or whatever we need it to be. For example, one of my pet peeves is the way you spell my name. If I can always tell if somebody's using a manual process, because if I type in a form and it comes back my name is misspelled, that tells me, okay, there's an error. Somebody's already misspelled my name. And I recently had to go through an issue with DMV where they misspelled my name. And you can imagine the headache I had to go to just to get that fixed. So that's one of our problems. Another problem that we have with manual processes is we're not able to actually track them accurately. Whenever you have a process in place, currently a lot of businesses are using like a database program, something like Excel or Access, to track processes through their cycles. However, this is information that has to be entered manually. Somebody has to always monitor the process, and even though it is accurate to some degree, it isn't really real time. So if I have a very critical process going on, I really don't know if that database is telling me what I want because I'm dependent upon somebody taking the time to actually go do that. Also, because people are people, we tend to not process content in the same manner. As such, this is not a repeatable process that can be replicated time and again. Somebody's always going to make a slight change here or there, or they're going to do something a little differently. And at the end of the day, I can't guarantee that this process is going to end on time. So for today's session, we're going to go over built-in workflows that come with SharePoint 2010 out of the box. We're also going to deal with SharePoint Designer 2010 workflows and how we can take those built-in workflows and maybe we need to do something a little more complex. We can use SharePoint Designer 2010. And then we're also going to go over how we can use Visio 2010 to assist us with creating workflows. Now, before I go into detail, I need to go over a few definitions for today. One thing, you'll probably hear a lot of people talk about workflows within Microsoft SharePoint 2010. Basically, a workflow the way I define it, is a business process that has been automated. So basically, if you look at any business today, you'll notice that they have several processes that are run. Now, these processes can be either formal, meaning they have a standard operating procedure or an SOP in place for that process, or the business process can be a little more informal in that it's just simply understood by everyone that this is what you need to do in order to complete this process. It's the latter of these two, the informal ones, that we're going to see are what gives us a lot of issues with dealing with manual business processes today. Either way, though, formal or informal processes can be automated using the workflow features within SharePoint, the SharePoint platform. Some examples of some business processes that you might want to think about automating, things like vacation approval requests, invoice reporting, technical support requests that you may receive, interviewing, also the publishing of web content on the webs, on your internet or internet site. Now, there are a lot more business processes that can be automated using SharePoint. The next definition I want to go through is what I consider out of the box for today's discussion. For what I call out of the box, I define out-of-box workflows as anything that does not require the use of a third-party vendor, but it can include any Microsoft product that has been specifically designed to work with the SharePoint platform with no configuration requirements for the SharePoint administration group or any developmental efforts needed from the SharePoint developer groups in order to make it work. Now, I had to make that because when we talk out of the box, some people think, oh, it's, whenever my administrator installed SharePoint, that's all that they had, so that's out of the box. Well, I'm going to take that a little step further, but also we're going to go not as far as going to Visio's or Visual Studio to create them. Okay. So some of the built-in workflows I'm going to talk about are what we call the different types of workflows that we can have, such as collecting feedback, approval, et cetera. We'll go over that in more detail in a moment. Also going to go over utilizing the built-in workflows. And finally, how do we edit or customize those workflows? The out-of-the-box ones that ship with SharePoint, although they're very powerful in and of themselves, and they can do a lot of operations on their own, my experience has been whenever I go into organizations is that they might get you close enough, but not all the way. So you may have to edit them. So we'll go over that a little bit, how we can edit those built-in workflows. Okay. Types of built-in workflows. Now, when SharePoint 2010 ships, it comes with 7 built-in or predefined workflows. Now, these include the collect feedback, which is used to route content to a group of people for feedback. Your reviewers will be able to provide feedback, which is then compiled and sent on to the person who started that workflow. You can also have what's known as the approval workflow. This routes content to a group of people for approval. Now, this workflow is a staged approval model, meaning that you are able to have one group of approvers followed by a second group of approvers and so on. So you're not just limited with just one group or one person to approve. I can actually have it go through different stages of approval. You also have what's known as the disposition approval. This manages the disposition of content expiration and retention. Basically, it lets the participants decide whether or not a content should be kept or deleted. If you had a chance to pick up the SharePoint 2010 Plain and Simple book, in there we talked about information rights management, and on one of those was the content disposition rights management that actually runs off of this workflow, the disposition approval workflow. There's also a collect signatures workflow, which basically routes documents to a group of people to collect their digital signatures. Now, this will only work with documents that were created within Microsoft applications. Also, this workflow must be started from either an Office 2007 or Office 2010 applications, such as Word. Another caveat about this workflow, participants must use either Word 2007 or 2010 to attach their digital signatures to those documents. And finally, this workflow will only show up in a document if the document contains one or more of Microsoft Office's signature lines. So the collect signatures one is very useful. However, just have to keep in mind it has several different constraints in order to make it appear and also to work inside your environment. We also have another pre-built workflow, which is called the 3-state. This is designed to track the status of content through the 3 different stages or phases. For example, in the case of a guest request, let's say I'm with a cruise line company, and we are accepting room service requests. I could actually set up this 3-state to set up this three-state workflow so that the guest gets in a request to room service, and then SharePoint can create a task item for the room service attendant. When the room service picks up the order, that changes this workflow state from the initial state of active to its middle state of perhaps resolved. And then once the room service attendant has delivered the late night snack to their guest, we can then change it to a node state of completed. Okay. We also have the translation management workflow. The translation management workflow, this workflow is meant for whenever we're dealing with translations, maybe you have to translate a document or what have you. This workflow will only work on the translation list within SharePoint 2010. And basically the way it works is it makes a copy of the documents that need to be translated, and then we can designate the participants of the people who are going to be translating this document. It doesn't actually translate it automatically for us. And also we have the issue tracking workflow that's built in. The issue tracking, this is attached to our issues tracking lists, and basically we can use this for reporting an issue and also to follow it through its stages. So as it's being worked on, the issue is being corrected or resolved or what have you, the person or people working on it can actually enter status updates so that people can go back in and read them. Okay. So those are the 7 built-in types of workflows that come in to it. Now, here's some things about utilizing some of these built-in workflows. One of them we're actually going to come across today in today's demonstration. The first one is workflows must be enabled for use on the list or library by your site administrator. Now, this morning I had a bit of an emergency, so I was rushing around like mad. And then when I got ready for this presentation today, I had to quickly go in and get everything set up for the demonstrations. And lo and behold, when you know it, Murphy struck me, and my primary SharePoint farm that I work with doesn't want to work. So luckily I have a fallback. However, on my fallback SharePoint farm, we don't have all the workflows enabled. So therefore, when we get to pre-built the demonstration, we're going to see an issue. But basically, if the workflow isn't enabled or set up on your site, you won't be able to use it. So if you wanted to use, for instance, the approval workflow, and you go to look for it in the pre-built, and you don't find it, one of the things you have to do is contact your site administrator to ask them, can you enable these workflows that I need to work with? The next thing, if you hear my daughter in the background, she's having her lunch, so sometimes she likes to get a little vocal. Next thing, workflow properties can be set for the entire library, meaning I can actually set up a workflow to work on the entire library, and I can pre-populate the properties that I want for it to have. So, for instance, if it is an approval workflow, I can have that set up so that it already knows who to go to, it already knows who to courtesy copy, everything else. So basically all someone has to do is select the start the workflow, and it's automatically going to have everything pre-populated and send it through its process all its own. Now, if you have a situation where your process has some variances, such as maybe I have a shared documents library and we want to apply the approval workflow to that library, and we could have several different approvals based on the different types of documents. It may go to one person as opposed to another person. In that instance, I'm not going to want to pre-populate those properties. I'm going to want to keep them so that when somebody does actuate the property, they will be able to set those individual properties that they want on that workflow. And finally, again, to repeat, depending on the workflows that we're initiating, we do have several options that can be set. So we could set things like, like I said before, the people to assign a task to, how long or durations we're going to give them to do things, and also time constraints if we want to put deadlines on it. And again, that's for just one single type of the built-in workflows. Next, some information on editing the editing our built-in workflows. Now, some built-in workflows can be edited using SharePoint Designers 2010. The declarative workflows can be edited, and our next section will actually go over what a declarative workflow is as opposed to a compiled workflow. But some of the declarative workflows are things like the approval, the collect feedback, collect signature, and publishing approval. Those can be edited since they are declarative workflows. Now, on the other hand, compiled workflows cannot be edited using SharePoint Designer. Those workflows include things like the three-state workflow. They can't be edited in Designer 2010. Instead, you'd have to use something like Visual Studio 2010 to do those. Now, one caveat about editing our built-in workflows, and we'll talk about this more when we get into the actual demonstration, but in order to prevent errors, it is recommended that we make a copy of our workflows first and then edit the copy version of the original workflow. In doing so, we are, in essence, not actually modifying the workflow. What you're doing is you are creating a new workflow based on the built-in, and then that's where you're going to do your work at. This is the best practice that I would advise anyone to do if you want to work with the built-in workflows. All right, let's move into our demonstration. Okay, so here I am on one of my SharePoint sites. This one is for a fake company I made up called PNS Cruise Lines. My demos today are going to be based on the premise of we're working on a SharePoint site for a cruise line, and we're actually on one of the ships, and they have several different business processes that they are working with currently, but they're very manually driven, and as such, they would like to automate a lot of their practices so that they can be a little more efficient and everything. The first thing that they wanted to do was to have a way of actually approving different documentations and also different forms that are processed throughout the ship. And their current environment, like I said, is very manually driven. In order to start using one of the built-in or pre-built workflows, one thing they're going to have to do is first go into the list or library that they would like to attach a workflow to. So here we have a petty cash request library that they have, and this library is used primarily for people requesting petty cash for whenever the ship is in port. If they have to buy something, they would like to be able to come in and actually purchase that item. Now, they would like to have just something easy just so they can go in, they can approve an item, and then once the item gets approved, someone can go down to the accounting office and get the cash they're going to need. In order to access those built-in workflows, what they can do is, first of all, in the library itself, they can click the Library tab under Library Tools. And if they go over to the right-hand side where we have Workflow Settings, we can actually click on that. Okay, and then what they would be presented with is a listing of all the workflows that are currently associated with this list. Now, if you remember when I was doing my discussion, I told you that in order for a workflow to be available on a list, the first thing they have to do is actually have it assigned to this list or to this site. So I'll notice here that when I go to the workflow site, it tells me that currently there are no workflows associated with this list. If I go down to the bottom where it says Add a Workflow, I can click on that link. And it shows me here the different workflows that are available on this site. Now, currently, this one only has the three-state workflow that's been enabled. This is not what they're looking for, so they're not going to be able to actually use this. Again, they'd have to contact in this case, the site administrator would have to contact either the site collection administrator or their SharePoint administrator user group to ask them, can you bring that on board for us? Okay. This demonstration, I was going to use the built-in approval workflow for this library. However, I can't in that it's not active. So we're going to go forward. We're going to use a three-state workflow instead, just so you can at least see some of the options, the parameters. We're not actually going to set one up, though, because this one isn't, the demo is not set for this type of workflow. Now, you'll see here there's only one here, but it's highlighted. Normally, when you have other workflows set up, you will see them listed here. So you select the three-state or collect feedback or the approval one. You can simply select the one that you want. Based on that, you will see changes occurring to your form. Now, the first thing all the workflow is going to ask for is a unique name for the workflow. So for this, we're just going to say document disposition. Okay, and then it wants to ask me, which task list. So this workflow assigns tasks to people or groups. I can either use the built-in task list that came with the site, or if I press the down arrow, I'm able to actually say I want to create a new task list. The same is true for the history list, and this is used to document the process that the workflow is going through. So you remember one of the things I said was a problem with the current business processes that are run manually is we cannot actually follow where it's going because it has to be done manually. Well, with SharePoint, I'm able to actually set up a workflow history list, and then once a workflow is started, I can go to this list and see where am I at in the workflow when it's going forward. Again, it wants to use a built-in workflow history list, or I could say I want to create a new history list. One caveat about creating these new task lists and new history lists, you'll notice it doesn't ask you for a name for that new list. What it's going to do is going to take the name of your library, in this case petty cash request, and it's going to put on a pin to that task list or history list. So it would make a new one saying petty cash request task list, for instance, or history list. Next, I can set up my start options. By default, the workflow is going to be set so that it has to be manually started by an authenticated user with edit permissions. I can also further refine that and say, no, I would like to start the person has to have managed list of permissions in order to start this workflow. But also, I have the option here to say, start this workflow whenever a new item is created. Also, we'll see here that we have two hidden or shaded out options available for starting the workflow, such as starting this workflow to approve publishing of a major version of an item, and also start this workflow when an item is changed. Now, because this library doesn't have too much going on with it, these options aren't really applicable to them. So for this one, I could say I want to start this workflow automatically when a new item is created. Then I can click the next button. And now it takes me into the three-state workflow. They're actually precise or custom choice fields that they would like for me to designate. So I'll notice here that it says, okay, for task, custom message workflow initiated, I can change that, include name list field. I want to include the name field. Also, you'll notice I do have choices of other items that I could assign. So basically, what I can do is just go straight down this listing and actually fill in the blanks where I would like for them to be applied to. And as you scroll down, you'll see there's even more information that deals with each of the different phases. So the initial one was the initial state, and then you have your middle state, okay? And then finally at the bottom, I have an area where I can actually set up who do I want to send this email message to, a subject that I need to put in there, and also a body. So again, with the three-state workflow, if that's what the demo was, we're not actually doing it, but if I was going to deploy this, I can see I'm actually able to set not just the states, but also when it's over, what to do with it, okay? And once that's finished, I can click OK, and it's going to take me over to my next stage. In this case, I'm not going to fill this in because, again, the demo is not set for a three-state workflow. I'm sorry about that. I wish my initial site would have worked so I could have shown you an entire setup. But basically, once you click the OK button, that workflow now becomes active on your list. Depending on whatever start items that you've set for it, you will see if it's set for automatically starting upon list creation or item creation or a change, whenever a new item is added or changed, then I would see this workflow is going to kick off all by itself. Also, when I do have a workflow set up, I'll actually see it in my drop-down list. Later on, when we do the SharePoint Designer workflows and the Visio workflows, you'll actually be able to see all of these options because they're going to fall right into that library, okay? And then we'll be able to work with them. Okay. Next. Yasmina, do you have any questions so far?
I'm not seeing any questions, so we'll let folks know. Folks, if you do have questions for Jonathan and what he's showing you today, please type that into the group chat, and we'll make sure he sees it. Back to you, Jonathan.
Thank you. Okay, let's go back into the presentation. Okay, I'm trying to get the slideshow back. Okay. All right. Next, using SharePoint Designer for workflows. Now, we're going to go over for this section the types of workflows, or two types of workflows that we have to keep in mind when we're working inside of Designer. Also going to go over events, conditions, and actions. Next, we'll go over building SharePoint workflows. And then finally, how do we deploy those SharePoint workflows back to SharePoint out of Designer. So first, types of workflows. You have to keep in mind that when we're working with SharePoint Designer, we are using one workflow editing tool that can help us. Another editing tool that we can use is Visio, in a roundabout way. When we get to the Visio section, I'll explain to you why I called it the roundabout way of doing workflow editing. But also you have something called Visual Studio 2010. Now, when you're working with Visio, or with SharePoint workflows rather, you have what are known as declarative workflows, and also you have something called compiled workflows. The thing to keep in mind for our purposes is declarative workflows can be edited by SharePoint Designer 2010, as opposed to compiled workflows that cannot be edited by SharePoint Designer 2010. They have to be edited by Visual Studio 2010. Now, I'm not going to go into the long definition and what makes a declarative workflow different from a compiled workflow. There's several different schools of thoughts, and also that's not the topic for this session. For our purposes, the major differences that we need to know about workflows is how they are run on a server. Basically, a compiled workflow is stored on the server that is running SharePoint Server 2010 as a precompiled DLL file, whereas a declarative workflow is deployed to the server as an XOML, or what we call an Extensible Object Markup Language file, which is compiled into the content database each time an instance of that workflow is started. Now, as I said before, we're going to be working with SharePoint Designer 2010 for creating our workflows for this session, so we're only going to be working with declarative workflows, not the compiled ones. But also, the SharePoint Designer workflows do take us pretty far. However, if you really wanted to make your workflows sing and do some great things, you'll want to look at Visual Studio for doing some workflows. But that's what I call the developer's domain, so I don't stay with those. So next, events, conditions, and actions for our workflows. Whenever we're working for workflows, we have three things that to keep in mind. We have to have an event. An event basically is what starts or initiates a workflow. For example, when an item is created, that would be our event. Okay, so as soon as a new item is created, that's the event. It's now going to start or initiate our workflow. Next is the conditions. A condition is basically a rule that has to be met. Once this condition is met, then the workflow will perform an action. For example, the condition might say the field says approved. That's our condition. If it says approved, then do this action. Might be to change another field or to send an email, for example. Okay. And finally, an action. An action is what we want to have happen once we've met our condition. For example, the condition based on the field saying approved, and the action is to send an email to the user letting them know that it's been approved. Creating workflows. In order to create workflows, another thing to keep in mind are permissions. It's, on this slide here, I've given a quick graphic, if you will, to show, if depending on what type of workflow that's associated to either a list or library, what type of permissions are needed. So, for instance, if you're going to associate it to a list or library itself, you're going to need to have full control permission levels on that list or library. As opposed to the list or library content type, you're going to have to be a part of the site owners group membership to mess with that. And the same is true for site content type workflows and also for site workflows. Okay. Inside of SharePoint Designer, when we create a workflow, we can associate either to a specific list, library, or content type. You can also create what we can call reusable workflow templates, which can be associated with multiple lists, libraries, or content types. So maybe I have we have at our company, we have a set approval for everything. So in that instance, I might say, okay, we're going to make a reusable workflow because no matter what list or library we're going to create, we're always going to use the same approval process. This is a big change from SharePoint 2007. in that you couldn't have that. You would have to go in and actually create each workflow, even though they were the same for each individual list or library that we're working with. You can also create workflows that run on the site level. Now, these are workflows that are not associated with a list, a library, or a content type. Instead, they're associated with the site, okay? An example for this would be a workflow that is set for obtaining comments or feedbacks on the site. So, in effect, you are attaching it to the site, but again, you're only looking for site feedback or something from the site itself. You're not actually wanting something from the actual list or library. Now, the steps for creating workflows. Basically, there's several different, there's 10 different steps that I consider whenever we're going to use SharePoint Designer to create one, to create a workflow. We have to start SharePoint Designer 2010, naturally. We have to select the list or library that we want the workflow to be run on, okay? And then on that, I have to then set the parameters for the workflow, things like the names. I can also put a description for the workflow in there. I can set maybe content approval. Maybe there's something I need to have occur on that list or library before it can actually run within that very first portion of creating the event. Next, if I go into the workflow section of the SharePoint Designer, which we'll see in a moment, I can actually click on the new button, and that's going to start up a new workflow for me. So I can start editing it. Next, I can select the task list or history that I would like the workflow to use. Then I can select either if I want to have visualization, which we'll go over again when I get to the demo. I have that option to actually start that up as well. The next thing I need to create are my conditions and my actions. Okay, so that was what I was saying earlier. Once this condition is met, then I would like for this certain action to take place, and that's something else that's able to that I can actually do and set up. And then once I've set the conditions and actions, I can actually publish the workflow. And there's something really neat inside Designer that we'll see, in that I don't have a lot of stuff happens in the background for me that I don't have to do manually. Things like it's going to save the workflow for me, it's going to check it for me to make sure it's valid or validated for me, and then it's actually going to upload and publish it to my SharePoint site and make it available to you for use. Okay. Next, using SharePoint Designer to create workflows. We have different types of workflows that we can create. Again, events, conditions, and actions need to be set for those. And finally, how to actually build those workflows. Instead of talking some more, I want to do another demo to get us started in the SharePoint Designer to show you how we do it, and hopefully you'll see how easy it is to actually work with them. And so let me bring back the screens. Okay, so here I am. So here I am in my site again, and we have another business process that they would like to have automated. In this case, they have a issue where in the casino they have a policy that allows the casino table to ask for chip credit. Basically, when they have a guest at the casino table, if they decide, hey, I'd like to have a credit of $500, for example, applied to my account so they can continue playing blackjack and stay on that winning streak that they're on. In the past, what they had to do was the table, the person running the table had to get a hold of the pit boss, who would have to then write out a request, and then it was a process of going out and trying to find the casino manager so that they could approve or disapprove that request. This was very time-consuming, and that the guests were getting upset because sometimes the casino manager might be on the other end of the casino. They may be doing some work in the office. They could be anywhere on the ship at any given time. And also, for the casino manager's point of view, he had some issues where sometimes people would request things that he couldn't do, or maybe they were requesting more money than their limit. So maybe the limit is at $2,000, and he was getting requests for $3,000. Well, that was automatically a disapproval. So they would like to automate this process. So A, they don't have to keep going around looking for the casino manager, and B, they would like to also automate the approval or rejection of some of the requests. So if, for instance, if anything is over the maximum, there's no reason to get a hold of the casino manager. It's just simply to disapprove it, okay? So we have a list here called the chip request list. If I go into that list right now, I'll notice that it's very manually driven. We currently have a place where they can put in the guest name, the guest room number, what table is making the request, and also what chip credit are they asking for, okay? The first thing I want to do is open up SharePoint Designer, so it would have my site in here. So in here, I'll notice I have SharePoint Designer up, and it already has the site loaded. In this case, PNS Cruise Line is the site that I would like to work on. For this one, I'm going to go into my list. I can actually select the List and Libraries option on the left-hand pane, and then I can go find the list that I would like to work in. In this case, I would like to work on the casino chip request list. Okay. All right, and I already have some workflows. Let me get rid of these two because we're going to recreate these two workflows. We'll just recreate. That's no problem. Okay, so now I can see the list here. One of the things I need to do is I need to make sure that I want to require content approval for certain submitted items. I'll notice here I have the required content approval. Hold on one second. Something's not right with this site. Things look too good. It's too easy. Let me close out that site because this is not the right site that I want to be in. There, this is where I want to be. Okay. All right. Yeah. It looked a bit too easy for me. Okay. So one thing I need to do is I want to require content approval for it on this list in that I don't want it just because somebody requests something, they need to have a response. So I'll notice here that when I access the actual list, in this case the chip request list, down under the settings, I can actually see I have the option to set the required content approval for, required content approval for submitted items. So if you remember, back in March 2007, we'd have to do that under the library settings, and now I can actually set it right here. The next thing I want to do is actually start up a workflow for it. So to do that, I'll notice up at the very top, I have list settings, and we have list workflows and all these different options available for me. I can actually go down, though, and I notice there's another section called workflows. And really easily, without having to use a ribbon, I can go over here to this little new button, and that's going to start my new workflow. In this instance, I'm going to name it chip approval. Keep it simple. Okay. And also workflow, give it a description. I consider it a best practice if you're going to make a workflow or create anything in SharePoint, please put a description in there. You're not going to always be at that site, and it's always good for people who are coming to your site to be able to read those descriptions. So I've noticed on a lot of SharePoint sites people don't do that. I personally think you should. Workflow for approving chip requests. You'll notice lots of things lengthy. I didn't put a whole essay in there. I can now click OK, and it's going to take me into the workflow. I'll notice it takes me straight into the conditions and actions. So one of the first things I want to do is I'm going to set some parameters on here. So the first thing I'm going to do is set up what's known as an initiation form parameter. And this is going to be basically simple. It's going to be the approver's email. So approver email. And these parameters I'm setting are going to be used within the workflow. So it's going to be a single line of text. That's okay. Click OK. The default value, I'll call it the manager at consulting.com and click Finish. And then I can add a second initiation. This one's going to be the max chip credit. This is going to be the maximum that people can request. And I'm going to call this one a number. Next. The default value, I'm going to say $2,000. You can't create anything more than $2,000. I can click OK. And also I wanted to create a local variable in here. This is going to be a figure that the workflow is going to use to figure out how much money is somebody, or yeah, how much chips somebody is requesting to ask. And so this one's just going to call it chip request. And this is going to be let's say a string. I can click add. All right, so now I have those local parameters set up. Next, I can go straight into action because I'm going to set this up so that later on, right before we publish it, we're actually going to change it so that it's, upon a creation, the workflow will kick off. So the condition would be upon creation. So now I can go straight into my action. So if I go up here to action, I'll notice that I have several different actions that I can apply to this workflow. In this case, I'm going to call it a workflow variable because I've set those initiation parameters and everything. And I'll notice that it's almost a wizard telling me step by step what I need to do. So the first one says set the workflow variable. I can say which variable I want. So in this case, I want to set the workflow variable chip request to value current item. I want you to find the chip credit. So basically I'm saying whatever the request is, I want you to change that variable chip request to match that. I want to click OK. All right. So now that is set, and now I can start my condition. Okay, so the first one was an action. Now we go into the condition. I want to compare field. Okay, there we go. So I'm basically going to say if field value chip credit is greater than, on this one I'll say that my max chip item is. So for the data source, I'm going to say from the workflow variables parameters, I'm going to say max chip request. Okay. So if the chip credit is, if they're requesting more than what our maximum is set for, then I want you to do an action, which is going to be to reject the item. You notice we still have a lot more options that are available to us, and I always get confused whenever I start getting in here trying to find the one I want. So I want to say I want to set a field to reject it. There we go. Set the field in the current item. So I'm going to say set this field. Oh, that's not what I needed. My apologies. Like I said, I have one eye on the computer, one eye on my daughter. She keeps me pretty busy. All right, so on the action, I want you to change a field. Set approval status. Okay. There we go. Set content approval status. Set content approval status to reject it. And I can actually type in the comments that I want. Just get a bigger screen so I can type in here. This request is more than maximum allowed. All right. This request is more than maximum allowed. Okay. All right. So now we've set the what to do the first stage. In this case, if it's to reject it, else we can do what's runs an else branch, else if branch. Okay, and what we can do here is add a new action. So basically, we're saying, okay, same thing. If it's greater than this, I want you to do this. If not, instead do this. I want you to send an email to these users. Okay, so I can actually select them. On here, I can go in here and say, okay, workflow, look up for a user. So then I'll say workflow variable. I want you to go to the approver email. Again, that was our parameter we set up earlier. I can click OK. And you'll notice I can actually put in a approval, a subject in here. So chip approval needed. Alternatively, I could have set up a task or a to-do item for them instead so they could actually do something. But for this one, we're just going to do an email because we're running short on time. Chip request needs approval. and click OK. All right. And now I have my workflow set up. So I have the first action, I have my condition, another action, and also if this is not the case, if it's less than that next chip, then I want to send a certain email to someone. In this case, the parameter that I set earlier. Next, I have to publish the workflow. So once I've gotten all the parameters in there to publish it, I simply go up to where it says Save and click Publish. Right now, notice it's sitting there, it's saving it, creating my initiation field. It's also validating this workflow to make sure it's a valid workflow. And it's also associating the workflow to that library, or in this case, that list. If I go into my list now, and I'm just going to refresh it real quick. Okay. If I go into my list now, I can actually see all the workflows that are associated with it, and I'll click on the Workflow Settings button, and I'll see here, there's that chip approval request. In this case, it says it has been set. But if you'll think, whoa, I forgot to do one thing. With the chip approval, I wanted to make it so that by default, whenever a new item was added, I would have to go in and update, or I wanted to automatically start this workflow. Not a problem. If that happens and you need to edit a workflow, I can always go back into the list or library that I have the workflow associated with. I'll notice there's that workflow listed under my workflows now. It's now currently set for manual start. I wanted it to do automated. I can simply click on it at this point, okay? And it takes me into the chip workflow settings, okay? So on this one, I have a section for my start options, and I could say here, start the workflow automatically when an item is created, okay? And then it's just a matter of, again, publishing it back up to SharePoint, and now that that workflow will be set to start automatically for me. All right. Because we're running out of time, I'm going to end this demonstration because I really want to show you the Visio portion of it. Okay, next, using Visio 2010 to design and create workflows. Due to the integrated nature of the Office 2010 products, you'll find that they all do work rather well together. The case in point is the connection between Visio 2010 and SharePoint Designer 2010. There's a couple things that you have to keep in mind, though, when you are working with Visio 2010 for workflows. You're not actually creating a workflow within Visio 2010. What you're doing is you're creating a template. As you'll see in the next demonstration, I'm setting up the steps that I would like it to follow. However, to actually put in the parameters, everything else, I'm going to need SharePoint Designer. So with Visio 2010, you're not actually creating a workflow, you're creating a template for the workflow. One thing that you probably didn't hear yet is with Visio 2010, to use it for workflows, you must be running Visio 2010 Premium. You can't have the other versions because you will not have the workflow tools that come with Premium. So that's another caveat that you have to keep in mind. But also, Visio 2010 is very easy to use. If you're familiar with using Visio for flow charting or maybe creating an organizational chart or something, it's the same concept of dragging and dropping the different shapes in there, which makes it ideal for automating business processes because a lot of them are flow charted. Okay? So whenever we're working with Visio 2010, we're basically charting a process and we're putting into the software, the Visio 2010 software, and we're able to save it. And then we're going to export that to SharePoint Designer 2010. Once we export into SharePoint Designer 2010, we can fill in our parameters. And that's also going to be where we're going to complete the workflow. Set up things like individual start and stops start that we'd like for it to have. And then once we've set all that up, then it's just a matter of deploying or publishing it over to SharePoint 2010. Okay. So for the next demonstration, I want to show you how we do this within Visio. Okay. All right. So when I open up Visio 2010, I'll notice I get this new screen. You'll notice here as soon as I come in, one of my recently used templates says Microsoft SharePoint Workflow. Again, I will not see this unless I'm running Visio 2010 Premium. Mine, it's set up as my recently used templates. However, if you haven't used it yet, if you go into the section of the template categories that says flowcharts, okay, you'll notice right here we have the SharePoint, Microsoft SharePoint workflow tools that are available. And also I'll notice I can either use metric units or I can use US units. I can click Create. Okay. Now notice it gives me this blank canvas, and this is where I'm going to start off and build my workflow template. On the left-hand side of my task pane here, I'll notice it has some of the more commonly used conditions and actions that are available to me, but also notice I have an option for actions, and it shows me a lot more actions that are available that I can choose from, and the same is true with conditions. Now, within SharePoint 2010, or with Visio 2010 setting up these workflows, they almost have a start and an end, okay? So basically I can simply click and drag and drop these onto my canvas where I want them at. So in this case I have start and stop. And then I can set up the conditions and the actions that I would like to do. So, for instance, I might say, okay, for the first condition, I want you to compare a data source. Okay? And then after that, I could set up an action, which in this case we're going to keep it simple. We're going to say send an email message to someone. Yeah. Okay, send an email message. Okay. Also, I have to now connect these. Okay. This is a very simple workflow. You'll notice just by looking at all the different actions and conditions available, I can do a lot more with it. But due to time, I need to speed this up a little bit. So I have to connect them. To connect them rather easily is if I hover over any of the objects, I'll see I get those 4 little arrows around it. I can simply point on the arrow in the direction I would like a connection to go and click on it, and I can just make all of these different connections in here. So I'm going to say, okay. And then I'm going to do another one down here in case you don't see that. Okay. All right. So now I have a compare data source, and now I have to set up my yes and my no's. I'll notice here that I did 2 links, so I'm going to say yes. This is going to be what to do if it's a yes. And then if I right-click on the second line here, I can say this is going to be my no. All right. And that's pretty much it. I've set up the start, the stop. I've set up my condition, my actions. Like I said, this is a very simple workflow to keep it simple for our purposes. However, I could have additional actions and conditions that are running. I have to make sure that I do attach them to each other, and also wherever the decision point shapes that, I have to say what to do if it's a yes and what to do if it's a no, and I have to designate those as such. The next thing I want to do is, the next thing I want to do is process this, and I have a process tab here, and I can check the diagram. And basically what I'm asking it is, hey, can you double check for me to make sure that I haven't done a parallel process, for instance, or if there is, it would give me a window that would tell me where it found an issue at, and then I can correct it. There are no issues on this one because it's so simple, so I'm going to click OK. And next I have to export it. I'll notice I have a little section called SharePoint Workflow, and I have an export button. So if I click Export, okay, and then I have my option here for saving it. So I'm just going to say Send Email. Keep that one easy. I can click Send or Save. Now that workflow has been saved as a GWI file, I can now go back into Designer. And if I want to bring that workflow in so that we can actually use it, if I click on my task pane where it says Workflows, it shows me all the workflows that are currently set up on my site. There's only one. And now I can actually import. And I'll notice on my tab, I have my ribbon, I have a Manage section, and I have Import from Visio. I can now select that, and then it's just a matter of me browsing to where my workflow that I just saved, that diagram is located. So on this one, it was Send Email. There we go. And I can click OK, Open, all right, and Next. Okay, so now it says, okay, I'm about to import this workflow for you. Are you going to give it a name? If I want to, I can change it. So I'll say changed check email. Okay. Next is, okay, where do you want to associate it to? Okay, I have all of my lists and libraries that are available to me. I could say send it to the shared documents. Okay, if I wanted to make this a reusable workflow, I have that option as well. I can click it, and then I can say what kind of content types or anything else I might want to associate so it's reusable. And I click Finish, and now it's actually brought it in. I'll notice now that here is my workflow. Now, it's not showing me the graphical version that I saw in Visio 2010, which is something else I like about using Visio because I'm a very visual person, so I prefer to actually see it laid out. But I'll see once it's imported into Designer, it takes off all the little pictures, and it says, okay, here's your workflow, just the parameters. So this is where I can go in and say, okay, check value, and I can go in, and I'll say, okay, check the current item field. I might say approval status. Click OK. Okay, and then I can say if it's equal to, and then check the status, approved. All right. Then I want you to email these users. And you'll notice this is the same dialog box that we had before. So again, I can designate who I want. I can just type in. I can actually type in an email address if I wanted to, or I can use my address book button to actually send it to a different group, or if there's a parameter I've set, I can use that as well. I also have my subject that's available that I can type in, and also the body of the text. Okay. Once that's all set, let me just put something in here. Send an email to Jonathan. Please review, and then I'm going to say, give me a lookup. Okay. All right. And I can click OK. It's actually going back into the server and making sure all these fields match. And again, just like we did when we were just working with SharePoint Designer 2010, I can go up and I can publish this workflow. It's going to check it, create an initiation field for it, validate it for me, save it, and upload it into SharePoint for me. Okay. I'm not going to wait for this to end, so we're going to get back into the slideshow. Okay, so for wrap-up purposes, today we went over built-in workflows. Basically, these are the ones that came pre-built, things like the collect signatures, collect feedback, the approval, disposition workflows. We also went into how do we use SharePoint Designer 2010 for our workflows. Again, I can use those to create new workflows. I can also use those to modify some of those built-in workflows that are there. Keep in mind that when it comes to editing workflows, that SharePoint Designer works with declarative workflows, not the collect feedback workflow, not the compiled workflows such as the three-stage workflow. And finally, we went over briefly how do we use Visio 2010 for our workflows. So things like something that might be a little more complicated, or maybe I have a process that isn't well documented. I might use Visio first to actually lay it out visually, if you will, and then I can import or export that into SharePoint Designer where I can fill in my parameters that I need for it to fill out. Okay. All right, guys, I think I'm finished. On the screen right now, we are ready for questions. Is there any questions available?
Yes, Jonathan, we have received a couple of questions, and we do have some folks talking about Designer. And they are asking if you can talk about that as far as their IT departments are against it and advising not to use it. And why would that worry them if they want to use Designer?
Designer, you've gotten a topic that there is a lot of discussion about. My personal view, a lot of departments are scared of employing Designer in their environments I think it's a lack of understanding of what Designer can do. I think everybody's heard the big bad, oh no, you can't use Designer because they can break your site, they can break your farm. And it's true, you can. If you don't know what you're doing, if you flip over, you're not working with just the workflow section, for instance, and you go into the HTML portion, yes, you can make some really bad changes. However, Designer can be, approvals levels can be set on it. You can determine how much somebody can do within Designer. I think that if you have an IT department that isn't too keen on deploying Designer out there and if they don't want people using them, it's probably a training educational issue on their end where they need to understand how do they set their environments up to restrict how Designer is used. However, it's not uncommon to have a lot of IT departments that are against it. Me personally, I'm an advocate for having it. And if you look at just doing those workflows, if you block out the use of Designer and then environments, well, guess who's going to have to do those workflows? Your IT department. And they've already have enough things to do already. So I would advise, discussing it with your IT department, possibly if you have power users who want to use it, site owners, for instance, for doing workflows, go to training, get training, and show that to them. I've gone to organizations before where I've said, I need Designer, and they've said, no, we don't use it. But once they know who I am, they're like, oh, well, you can have it, because they realize I do know how to use the software. But I also know going in the computer room and showing them, hey, this is what you need to do to make your environment a little safer so you can have more people using it.
Perfect. And we have one other question. Let's see here. Frank. Oh, we have two actually. Frank asks, what causes workflows to terminate with an error?
Sometimes, depending on some of your workflows, you could have certain variables or parameters set up that go against farm policy or governance that are set up on your farm. So therefore, you're trying to make your workflow do something that's out loud. That's a possibility. One thing that I saw recently with one workflow, this was really a basic issue. It was supposed to go to another list and make a change to that list. Well, that list got deleted. So the workflow went to try to change this list item, and it couldn't because that list no longer existed. So it could be something as basic as that. If you are getting that, one thing I would suggest is whenever they do terminate, it does give you a link that you can click on, and it may take a little bit of reading through to sort through some of the coding that's in there, except a lot of times those errors do come back and they tell you exactly what the problem was. In the case of the one with the missing list, I was able to read through it and said, oh, the list doesn't exist anymore. So we had to pull up Designer, I had to see where it was pointing to, and that's how I figured it out. So if you do have an issue like that, also make sure you're talking to your SharePoint administrators group. Maybe they've made some changes on the server as well.
Okay, and our final question is from Mark. And when you were talking about Visio, he'd like to know what version of Visio you were referring to.
I was referring to Visio 2010, the premium version.
All righty, perfect. Jonathan, at this time we're going to say a very big thank you to you for sharing all your knowledge and expertise with us today. We thank all the attendees that joined us today, and we hope they benefited from the presentation. We'd like to remind you to mark your calendars. Our next webcast will be presented on July 28th, and it's part of our TOC series, and it's titled The Changing World of Digital Rights and Publishing Agreements, and it will be presented by Dana Newman and Jenny Bent. Again, thank you so much, Jonathan. Thank you all for attending today's webcast. We hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.